In a quiet neighborhood at the edge of a small town lived an old couple who had been together longer than most people could imagine. They had seen the world change, watched friends come and go, and survived years that weren't always easy. But through everything, they never stopped choosing each other. People around them often said their love felt like something out of a storybook, the kind of bond that time couldn't touch. Their days were simple now. They woke up early, shared breakfast by the window, and talked about little things like the weather, the sound of the birds, or how the flowers in the yard were growing. The husband still made tea the way she liked, just a little bit sweet, while she always made sure his toast didn't burn. These tiny habits had turned into something sacred over the years. They didn't need grand gestures anymore. Their love lived in the everyday things. The soft laugh she gave when he forgot where he put his glasses. The way he always pulled her chair out before sitting down, even after 60 years. When they met, they were just two young souls trying to build a life from nothing. It was a time when love was simpler but also harder in some ways. He had worked long hours trying to build a home for them, while she managed everything else, keeping the house warm, raising their children, and finding small joys in the middle of hard days. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and somehow that was always enough. Their first house was small, with old wooden floors that creaked whenever they walked. On rainy nights, they would sit close together and listen to the sound of water hitting the roof. They couldn't afford much back then, but they had dreams. They talked about growing old side by side, watching their children build lives of their own, and sitting on the porch one day, holding hands while the world kept spinning around them. Those dreams, simple as they were, had all come true. Now their children had families of their own. The house that was once filled with laughter and noise had grown quieter, but silence never bothered them. In a way, it made them closer. They didn't need to talk much anymore. They could understand each other just with a look. He could tell when she was tired, and she always knew when he was pretending to be fine. After 60 years together, words were almost unnecessary. Every evening they sat by the same window watching the sun dip below the trees. It was their favorite part of the day. Sometimes she would rest her head on his shoulder, and he'd smile softly, remembering how he used to do the same when they were young. They often said their love had changed forms over the years. In the beginning, it was full of excitement and energy, but as time passed, it became something deeper, something that didn't need to be spoken to be real. Friends who visited them always noticed how calm their home felt. There was a kind of warmth that couldn't be described, a peace that came from two people who had lived through everything together. They had faced good days, bad days, and moments that tested their strength. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and years when things didn't go as planned. But even when life got heavy, they never turned away from each other. They always found their way back. There was a saying the husband often used: "We've told each other everything, there's nothing left to hide." He believed it with all his heart. After all these years, what could possibly remain unspoken between them? They had built their lives on honesty and trust. Every story, every struggle, every memory, they had shared it all. Or at least that's what he thought. Sometimes, though, there was a look in her eyes that made him pause. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like she was remembering something from long ago, something that still lived quietly in her heart. He noticed it once when they were sitting by the fireplace. She had been smiling at an old photograph of them from their wedding day, but then her expression changed. He asked her what she was thinking about, but she just shook her head and said, "Oh, it's nothing. Just memories." He didn't push her. He never did. He believed if it was important, she would tell him. And maybe she had her reasons for keeping it to herself. Life was moving slower now. Their days had a peaceful rhythm, but underneath it there was a gentle awareness that time was slipping away. They didn't talk about it much, but they both knew. Every laugh, every shared meal, every walk down the street felt more precious because they never knew how many were left. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night and just watch her sleep. Her hands, once steady and strong, now looked fragile, and he would gently hold them, afraid to let go. In those moments, he silently thanked life for giving him someone who stayed. No matter how difficult the road had been, she was the heart of everything. Even in her old age, she carried the same soft smile that had first caught his attention decades ago. She had a way of making ordinary things beautiful, folding clothes, cooking a meal, or simply humming a tune while dusting the shelves. He used to tell her she made the house feel alive. And she'd laugh and say, "That's because you're here." As the years piled up, they began to spend more time revisiting the past. They looked through old letters, yellowed photographs, and small souvenirs collected from family trips. Each item carried a story, some funny, some bittersweet. They would laugh remembering the time they got lost on vacation, or when their son accidentally painted the living room wall green instead of blue. Life had been far from perfect, but it was full, filled with stories that belonged only to them. On one evening, while they were sitting outside, she asked quietly, "Do you ever think about what we'll leave behind?" He looked at her, confused. "You mean for the children?" She nodded, but didn't answer right away. Her eyes were on the horizon, where the sky was turning gold. "I just hope," she said softly, "that when they think of us, they remember love. Not the mistakes, not the things we couldn't change. Just love." He smiled, reached for her hand, and said, "That's all they'll remember." She smiled back, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes he couldn't understand. In the evenings, when he would sit by her side and read the newspaper aloud, she sometimes drifted into her own thoughts. He would catch her staring into space, her lips slightly curved into a faint, nostalgic smile. When he asked what she was thinking, she'd simply reply, "Just the past." It became such a common answer that he stopped asking. Maybe he didn't want to disturb the memories that lived quietly inside her heart. There were moments when the air between them felt full of things unsaid, but not in a painful way. It was like both of them carried their own tiny worlds inside, secrets, regrets, dreams that never came true. And that was okay. After 60 years together, they had learned that love didn't mean knowing every detail. Sometimes it meant accepting the mystery of another person's soul. Their story was never about perfection. It was about holding on, forgiving, laughing again after tears, and choosing to stay. Every wrinkle on their faces carried a memory. Every silence between them carried understanding. And though life was beginning to move slower, their hearts still beat for each other in quiet harmony. On the night before their 60th wedding anniversary, he looked at her and said, "You know, we've told each other everything. There's nothing left between us but truth." She smiled at him, gently nodding, but her eyes glistened in a way that made his heart pause. He thought it was just emotion, just the weight of all those shared years. But deep inside her, there was something else, something she had kept locked away for a lifetime. He didn't know that before their story ended, her final words would open a door to a truth he never saw coming. But for now, he held her hand, thinking their love story had already told every chapter there was to tell. Time had a gentle way of slowing everything down in their house. The mornings were quieter, the days felt longer, and even the ticking of the old wall clock seemed softer than before. The couple's life had fallen into a calm routine that carried a certain peace but also a quiet sadness, the kind that comes when you realize life doesn't move as fast as it once did. The husband still woke up before sunrise, just as he had done for decades. He would make tea for both of them, though now he added more care to every movement. His hands trembled slightly when he poured the water, and he took his time to make sure it was just right. Warm, not too hot, with a touch of sweetness. Then he would walk slowly to the bedroom where his wife lay resting, her head against a pile of soft pillows. She smiled every time she saw him walk in holding 2 cups. Their love had grown quieter over the years, but it hadn't faded. It lived in these small moments. Him helping her sit up, her whispering thank you even though she didn't need to. She had always been strong, the kind of woman who never asked for help. But now her strength came in smaller ways, in her patience, in her smiles, in how she still tried to make him laugh even when she didn't feel well. Her health had started to decline, not suddenly, but slowly, like a candle burning lower each day. It began with tiredness that she brushed off as old age. Then came the days when she couldn't stand for long, and the nights when she woke up short of breath. The husband pretended not to worry, but every time she coughed, his heart tightened. He had always been the one to fix things, to repair broken chairs, to patch up walls, to solve any problem that came their way. But this was something he couldn't fix no matter how much he wanted to. Doctors said it was part of aging, that her body was simply getting weaker. She smiled through the appointments, always polite, never complaining. When they came home, she would tell him, "Don't worry, I'll be fine." But he knew better. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Still, he never let her see his fear. Instead, he told stories, made small jokes, and held her hand as if that could keep her safe. Their children called often, worried about their mother. They visited when they could, bringing food and flowers and sitting with her for hours. She always tried to make them laugh, pretending everything was fine so they wouldn't be sad. She would say, "I've lived a full life. You all turned out well. That's what matters." But when the house went quiet again, her husband noticed how tired she looked. He would sit beside her and brush her hair with slow, careful strokes, the same way she once did for their children. Sometimes she would fall asleep halfway through, and he'd just sit there holding her hand, afraid to let go. There were days when she was strong enough to walk to the garden. Those were his favorite days. He would help her put on her old cardigan, and they'd sit together on the wooden bench under the tree they planted years ago. She would close her eyes and breathe in the smell of the flowers. "This is enough," she'd say softly. "Just sitting here with you." And he would smile, trying to hide the tears forming in his eyes. But not every day was easy. There were mornings when she couldn't get out of bed, no matter how hard she tried. The husband would carry her gently, whispering, "It's all right, I've got you." He cooked for her, fed her spoon by spoon, and told her stories from their younger days. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she just listened with her eyes closed, a faint smile resting on her lips. He could see how her body was changing, growing thinner, weaker. Yet even in her silence, she still had a grace that filled the room. At night, when she couldn't sleep, they would talk. She'd ask him about the children, about old friends they hadn't seen in years, or about the small things. What flowers bloomed that day, what bird had nested near the window. Her voice was softer now, almost a whisper, but her mind was sharp as ever. She remembered everything: their first house, their first fight, their first holiday. He loved listening to her stories because they made him forget the ticking clock and the reality of what was coming. Still, there were moments when he caught her staring off into the distance, her expression thoughtful, almost troubled. "What's on your mind?" he'd ask. She would smile faintly and say, "Oh, just remembering." Sometimes, though, she'd add, "There are some things I wish I'd said earlier." He would hold her hand and tell her she'd said enough, that there was nothing between them left unsaid. But her eyes told a different story. There was something hidden there, something she carried quietly, and he couldn't quite reach it. He tried not to think too much about it, but late at night it would return to him. The look in her eyes, the weight of something unsaid. Her illness grew worse as months passed. She began to spend most of her time in bed, and the house, once filled with the sounds of movement, became almost still. The husband's world shrank to the four walls of their bedroom. He rarely left her side. Friends offered to help, but he refused. He wanted to be the one to care for her, the way she had cared for everyone her whole life. He told her stories of the garden, of how the roses had started to bloom again. She would listen quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying softly. "You always make things sound beautiful," she once told him. "That's because you're in them," he replied. There were moments of deep tenderness between them. Sometimes he would hum her favorite song while sitting beside her. Other times she would reach for his face and whisper, "You've always been kind to me." He would laugh and say, "Always," even when we argued. She'd chuckle softly and say, "Especially then." These moments felt fragile but precious, like tiny lights in the middle of long, dark days. As time went on, she began to speak less. She slept more and her body grew weaker, but even in her silence she still found ways to show love. A gentle squeeze of his hand, a faint smile when he walked in, a soft whisper of his name before falling asleep. The husband, though exhausted, never complained. He told their children, "I'm lucky. I get to spend every day with her." And he meant it. Caring for her gave him purpose. It made him feel close to her in a way he never had before. One evening, when the sky outside turned a soft shade of orange, she asked him to sit beside her. He pulled up a chair and held her hand. "Do you remember," she said slowly, "the day we planted that tree outside?" He smiled. "Of course. You said it would grow taller than our house." She nodded, her eyes soft. "It did. I always thought it would outlive us. Maybe that's a good thing." He didn't reply, afraid his voice would break. After a long pause, she said quietly, "You've been good to me, you know that?" He squeezed her hand gently. "And you've been everything to me," he whispered. That night, as he watched her sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, not just in her body, but in the air around them. There was a stillness, a heaviness, as if time itself was slowing down to watch over them. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered, We've told each other everything, haven't we? She stirred slightly, opened her eyes, and looked at him for a long moment. Then she gave a faint smile and said, yes. Almost everything. He didn't think much of it then. He thought she was just tired, just half asleep. But that night, long after she drifted off, her words echoed in his mind. Almost everything. It was such a small phrase, but it lingered like a shadow in his thoughts. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees and the house was quiet again. He sat there beside her, watching the soft rise and fall of her breathing, realizing how fragile everything had become. 60 years of memories, laughter, and love, all wrapped up in this single room. He wanted to hold on to every moment, afraid that if he blinked, it might all disappear. And as the days turned into weeks, he began to understand that love, in its truest form, isn't just about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go, even when you don't want to. The house had grown quieter than ever. The walls seemed to hold their breath, and even the wind outside felt softer, as if it didn't want to disturb the stillness inside. The woman's health had declined so much that she could no longer move around freely. Her world had become the small room at the end of the hallway, the same room where she had once read stories to her children, where laughter and music used to fill the air. Now the sound of a clock ticking was the only thing that broke the silence. Her husband spent every moment by her side. He barely slept, afraid that if he closed his eyes for too long, something might change. The doctors said there wasn't much left to do except keep her comfortable. The words felt heavy, but he didn't show it. Every day he made sure her favorite blanket was tucked around her shoulders and that fresh flowers stood in a small vase near the window. He wanted her to still see beauty even from her bed. Some mornings, when the sunlight came through the curtains, she looked peaceful. Her skin was pale, her breathing soft, but her eyes still carried that same gentle warmth. When he sat beside her, she always smiled, though it was faint now. "You look tired," she would whisper. He'd shake his head, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. You just rest." But she could see the exhaustion on his face, the kind that doesn't come from sleepless nights, but from fear of losing the person you love most. Sometimes, when she slept, he'd look around the room and remember all the little things she had done over the years. The pictures on the wall, the curtains she had sewn herself, the books she loved to read. All of it felt like pieces of her soul scattered around their home. It was hard to imagine the house without her. Every object, every sound, every smell reminded him of her presence. Even silence did. Their children visited often, though they tried not to cry in front of their parents. They would sit on the edge of the bed, talking softly about small things. The garden, the grandchildren, the neighbors. The woman listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes smiling weakly. She didn't talk much anymore, but when she did, her words carried a strange calm, as if she had already made peace with everything. Before they left, she always held their hands and said, "Take care of each other." The husband would walk them to the door, and once they were gone, he'd return to her side as if afraid she might disappear in the few minutes he'd been away. One evening, when the sky outside was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, she asked him to open the window. The breeze was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "It smells like spring," she said softly. He nodded, even though he could feel the chill in the air. She smiled faintly. "Do you remember when we used to dance outside after the rain?" He laughed quietly, the sound trembling. "Of course I do. You always said the rain made the world cleaner." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes shining with memory. "You made my world cleaner," she whispered. His heart ached at her words, but he only tightened his hold on her hand. That night he stayed up reading to her. She had always loved to hear his voice, even when she didn't have the strength to respond. He read from an old book of poems they used to share when they were younger. His voice cracked every now and then, but he kept reading. She listened quietly, her eyelids heavy. When he finished, she said softly, "You've always known how to make me feel safe." He leaned closer and kissed her forehead. "That's because you've always been my home," he said. Days passed and her condition worsened. She spoke less, ate little, and slept most of the time. The husband barely left the room, sitting in the same chair by her side. Sometimes he would talk even when she was asleep, just to fill the silence. He told her about the birds outside, about the mailman who still asked how she was doing, about the way the neighbor's cat had taken to sitting on their porch. He wanted her to know that life was still happening, even if she couldn't see it. But deep down he knew she was slowly slipping away. Then one night something changed. The air felt different, heavy and still. She woke up and called his name in a faint whisper. He was by her side in seconds, holding her hand. Her eyes were open and she was looking at him with a strange intensity. "Do you still believe," she said weakly, "that we've told each other everything?" Her voice was fragile, almost like a sigh. He smiled gently, trying to comfort her. "Of course," he said. "There's nothing left to tell. We've lived a whole life together." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Then forgive me," she said quietly. "There's something I never told you." He froze for a moment, his heart suddenly pounding. "What do you mean?" he asked softly. But she seemed distant, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond him. He tried to read her expression. It was full of emotion, but he couldn't tell if it was guilt, sadness, or peace. "It doesn't matter now," she whispered. "I just needed you to know I didn't forget. I just couldn't—" Her voice broke before she could finish. He leaned closer, panic rising in his chest. "What couldn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice trembling. She opened her mouth to speak again, but her breathing grew shallow. "Please," she whispered, "forgive me." He could feel her hand growing cold in his. "Forgive you for what?" he asked desperately. But she didn't answer. Her eyes fluttered, and then, in one long, slow breath, her body went still. The silence that followed was unbearable. He called her name again and again, hoping she would wake up, that maybe she was just sleeping. But deep down he knew. The room felt empty in a way it never had before. He sat there for a long time, unable to move. The world outside kept going, the wind still blew, the trees still swayed. But inside that room, everything had stopped. He held her hand until the morning light crept through the curtains. When the children came, they found him sitting there, eyes red, face pale, still whispering her name as if saying it could bring her back. The days that followed felt like a blur. The house filled with people, friends, family, neighbors, all coming to say their goodbyes. He moved through it all quietly, almost in a daze. Everyone told him she had lived a long, beautiful life. They called him lucky for having shared it with her. And he was, but luck didn't stop the ache. At night, when everyone left and the house went quiet again, he sat alone in the room where she had spent her last days. He looked at her empty chair, the folded blanket, the half-read book on the bedside table. It all felt too real and unreal at the same time. But the thing that wouldn't leave his mind were her final words, those few sentences that felt both haunting and unfinished. "There's something I never told you." He replayed them over and over, trying to understand. What secret could she have possibly kept from him? They had lived together for 60 years, shared everything from joy to heartbreak. What could she have been too afraid to say? Some nights he convinced himself it didn't matter. Maybe she was just confused. Maybe she didn't mean anything by it. But other nights he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important, something she wanted him to know but couldn't bring herself to say. The thought followed him everywhere. When he walked through the garden, when he sat by the window, even when he tried to sleep, he could still hear her voice, soft, trembling, and full of mystery. It wasn't just the loss that kept him awake. It was the question she left behind. In the quiet that followed her passing, he began to notice small things he had overlooked before. A locked drawer in her writing desk, an old photo album she hadn't opened in years, a box of letters tucked away on a shelf. Each one seemed to whisper that maybe there was more to her story than he had ever known. But for now, he couldn't bring himself to open them. He wasn't ready. All he could do was sit by her empty chair and whisper into the silence, "Whatever it was, I forgive you." Yet even as he said the words, a part of him knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning of the truth she had left behind. Days turned into weeks after she passed away, yet the house still carried her presence. It was in the faint smell of her favorite perfume, in the sound of the floor creaking where she used to walk, in the soft hum of the clock that had always ticked beside her bed. Every corner of the house whispered her name. The husband moved through it quietly, speaking little, eating even less. He didn't know how to live in a space that had been built around her for 60 years. Every morning he still made 2 cups of tea out of habit. One for himself, one for her. Then he would sit by the window where they used to talk and place her cup across from him. He couldn't bring himself to drink from it. It was as if he was still waiting for her to walk in, smiling, saying, "You made it just right this time." But the chair stayed empty, and the silence stayed heavy. People tried to comfort him. The children called every day, Friends dropped by with food. Neighbors waved kindly from the gate. Everyone said the same thing, that time would heal him. But he didn't want time to heal him. Healing felt like forgetting, and forgetting her was something he could never do. He didn't cry much anymore, but he carried a quiet ache that never left his chest. At night, he often sat in the room where she had taken her last breath. The bed was neatly made, the blanket folded at the foot, the vase of flowers long wilted. He would sit there talking to her as if she were still lying there. "I hope you're comfortable," he would whisper. "I hope it's peaceful wherever you are." And then every night the same words echoed in his mind, her final ones. "There's something I never told you." Those words haunted him more than he liked to admit. At first, he tried to convince himself it didn't matter. Maybe it was nothing important. Maybe she was confused near the end. But the more he tried to forget, the stronger the memory became. Her voice replayed in his head, trembling yet deliberate. She had wanted to say something real, something she had carried all those years. One afternoon, while cleaning her old writing desk, he found a small wooden box tucked in the back of a drawer. It was old and dusty, with a thin gold clasp that had dulled over time. He didn't remember seeing it before. His hands trembled as he picked it up. For a long moment, he just sat there staring at it, afraid of what he might find inside. Finally, with a deep breath, he opened it. Inside was a folded letter, yellowed with age, and a small photograph. The photograph showed his wife when she was young, smiling, standing beside a woman he didn't recognize. They were outside what looked like a small hospital, both wearing simple dresses and holding something in their hands, perhaps a baby blanket. His heart began to race. He turned the photo over, and on the back were 3 words written in her familiar handwriting: "For when you're ready." He unfolded the letter carefully. The paper was fragile, the ink slightly faded, but the handwriting was clear. The first few lines made his hands tremble even more. "My love, if you are reading this, then I was never brave enough to tell you in person. I wanted to, many times, but I could never find the right words. I kept this secret not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't want it to change the way you looked at me." He stopped reading for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. A deep ache filled his chest as he continued. "Before we met, before our lives began together, there was a time when I made a decision that changed everything. I was young, scared, and alone. I brought a child into this world, but I wasn't able to keep her. I was told it was the best thing to do, that she would have a better life with someone who could care for her properly. I never saw her again, but I thought about her every day." The words blurred before his eyes as tears filled them. He had to set the letter down for a moment. A child? She had a child before they met? His heart pounded as questions flooded his mind. Why hadn't she told him? Why had she carried this alone all those years? But when he picked up the letter again, the answers were already waiting for him. "When I met you, I didn't know how to tell you. You were kind, gentle, and full of hope. I didn't want my past to cast a shadow on our new life together. Every time I thought of saying something, I saw the way you looked at me with such trust, and I couldn't do it. I told myself it was better left behind. But even though I never spoke of her, a part of me always wished you could have known. You would have understood. I know that now." He could almost hear her voice as he read those words. She was right, he would have understood. He wouldn't have judged her. He would have held her and told her that she had done what she thought was right. But now it was too late to tell her that. The letter continued. "There were moments when I wanted to tell you. The night our first child was born, the day we moved into our new home, the time you told me you loved me for the 1,000th time. But each time I stayed silent. I didn't want you to think of me differently. You made me feel pure again, as if my life began the day I met you, and I wanted to keep that feeling forever." He wiped his eyes and read the last few lines slowly, his heart breaking and healing all at once. "If you ever read this, I hope you can forgive me. I didn't keep this from you out of shame, but out of love. I wanted our life to be full of light, not shadows. Please know that every day I spent with you was built on love, honest, deep, and true. You were my second chance, my peace, my home. If you ever find her picture, know that somewhere out there, a part of me is still alive through her. And now that you know, I hope you'll think of me not as someone who lied, but as someone who loved you so deeply she couldn't bear to let pain touch you." He sat still for a long time, holding the letter in his trembling hands. The room around him felt both smaller and larger at the same time. He wasn't angry, not really, just heartbroken that she had carried this weight alone. He thought about all those quiet moments when she had seemed lost in thought, all the times she had smiled with a sadness he didn't understand. Now he knew why. That night he placed the letter back in the box and held it to his chest. For the first time in weeks he spoke aloud into the silence. "You didn't need to hide it from me," he whispered. "I would have loved you just the same." His voice cracked, but there was peace in it. He took the photograph and placed it on the bedside table next to her picture. The two of them side by side, decades apart. He didn't know who the child had become or where she was, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that his wife had lived her life with love even when it hurt. In the following days he told no one about the letter. It felt too personal, too sacred. Instead he carried it in his pocket, reading it over and over whenever the ache returned. The words never changed, but the way he felt about them did. At first they brought tears. Then slowly, they brought peace. He started spending more time in the garden again, sitting under the old tree they had planted together. Sometimes when the wind rustled the leaves, he thought he could hear her voice. Not sad, not heavy, just calm. It was as if she was finally free. And though the secret had changed the way he remembered her, it didn't break anything. If anything, it deepened his love for her. It made her more human, someone who had carried pain, made choices, and still loved him with her whole heart. One evening, as the sun began to set, he whispered to the empty air, "You were right. You didn't have to be perfect. You just had to be you." For the first time since she was gone, he smiled, a real smile, soft and full of peace, because her last words, the ones that had once haunted him, no longer felt like a mystery. They felt like love in its most fragile and honest form. The morning sun slipped through the curtains, lighting the small kitchen where he sat with his tea. The cup trembled slightly in his old hands, but there was a calmness in him that hadn't been there for months. The letter he'd found changed him, not in a way that broke him, but in a way that softened him. It made him realize how little we truly know about the people we love, even after a lifetime together. He had spent weeks thinking about what to do with her secret. Part of him wanted to keep it locked away just between them. Another part, though, felt that maybe her story shouldn't end in silence. Maybe there was still something left unfinished, something he could do for her now that she was gone. One afternoon, as he sat in the garden, he made a decision. He would try to find the daughter she had mentioned in her letter, not out of curiosity, but out of love. He wanted to tell her that her mother had never forgotten her, not for a single day. The idea scared him at first. He was old. His memory wasn't what it used to be, and he had no clue where to start. But he felt guided by something, by her. He often talked to her when he was alone, telling her what he was thinking. This time he said softly, "If I'm meant to find her, show me the way." The next morning he went to the small-town library. It had been years since he'd last been there. The librarian recognized him and gave a warm smile when he explained what he was looking for. She helped him look through old records, hospital archives, and even local newspaper announcements. Hours passed, days turned into weeks, and he found little more than fragments, names, dates, possibilities. But he didn't give up. Something in him knew this mattered. Every night he read the letter again, holding on to the line where his wife had written, "I hope you'll think of me not as someone who lied, but as someone who loved you so deeply." That thought gave him strength. He wanted to honor her love by finishing what she couldn't. One afternoon, while flipping through an old hospital register, he came across a name that matched the date and place she had mentioned. It was faint, written in neat handwriting, followed by the note, "Adopted, confidential." His heart beat faster. This was it. This had to be her. The librarian, seeing his trembling hands, gently said, "I can help you find where this file was transferred." A few phone calls later, they learned the adoption had gone through an agency that still existed, though under a new name. He thanked her, went home, and sat quietly before picking up the phone. The number was long, his hand shook as he dialed. When a woman answered, her voice calm and professional, he explained who he was and why he was calling. There was a long pause on the other end. Then the woman said softly, "Sir, I can't give you private information over the phone, but if you can send a written request, we can see what we're allowed to share." He thanked her, hung up, and immediately sat down to write. The letter took him 2 days. He wrote slowly, carefully, explaining everything from his wife's passing to the letter she left behind. He wrote about their 60 years together, how kind she was, how much she regretted not being able to tell her story. He didn't ask for details. He just wanted the daughter to know her mother had loved her deeply. Weeks passed before he heard anything back. Each day he checked the mail, hoping. Then one morning, a letter arrived with the agency's seal. His heart raced as he opened it. It said they couldn't share personal information, but they could forward his letter to the daughter if she was still alive and consented to contact. That was enough for him. He signed the papers immediately and sent them back. After that, all he could do was wait. He didn't tell anyone, not his children, not his friends. It felt private, sacred. It was something between him, her, and the memory of the woman he had loved. The waiting stretched into months. Sometimes he thought maybe it wasn't meant to happen. Maybe she didn't want to be found. Other times he felt a quiet hope that somehow she'd reach back. One rainy afternoon, when he least expected it, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The return address from another city. His heart pounded as he opened it, afraid and eager all at once. Inside was a single page. "Dear sir, I received your letter through the agency. At first I didn't know what to think. I've lived my whole life wondering about the woman who gave birth to me. All I ever knew was that she was young, kind, and wanted the best for me. Reading your words made me feel like I met her for the first time." He stopped reading for a moment, his eyes wet, his heart heavy and full at the same time. He continued, "Thank you for sharing her story. I don't know if I have the right words, but I'd like to meet you, if you're open to that. I'd love to hear more about her, about who she was, what made her laugh, what her life was like. It would mean a lot to me." The letter ended with a name and a phone number. He sat there for a long time just staring at it. His hands trembled as he picked up the phone again. The number felt both strange and familiar. When she answered, her voice was calm, gentle. They spoke slowly, carefully, both emotional and unsure. They agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between their towns. When the day came, he dressed in his best suit, the one she had always said made him look distinguished. He took the photograph of his wife and her daughter with him, tucked safely in his jacket pocket. At the cafe, he arrived early. The moments felt endless as he waited, his heart thudding like it hadn't in years. Then he saw her walk in. She was in her 40s with kind eyes and a quiet grace that reminded him so much of his wife. It took his breath away. When she reached the table, neither spoke for a moment. They just looked at each other, two strangers connected by a love that had waited a lifetime. He finally smiled, his voice soft. "You look like her." She smiled back, her eyes shining. "I've always wondered if I did." They talked for hours. He told her everything, how her mother had laughed at the smallest things, how she loved the garden, how she'd always put others before herself. He told her about their children, their long life together, and how her mother had carried her memory through it all. She listened quietly, tears in her eyes. "I used to dream about her," she said. "I always felt like a part of me was missing. But hearing you talk about her, it's like that part just came home." When they finally stood to leave, she hugged him tightly. It wasn't awkward or uncertain. It was real, full of emotion, as if they had known each other all their lives. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me." He smiled, his voice trembling. "No, thank you for letting me." When he returned home that evening, the house didn't feel so empty anymore. He placed the photo of his wife back on the table, this time beside a new one, their daughter smiling beside him. For the first time in months, he felt peace settle over him like a warm blanket. He sat by the window as the sun set, watching the golden light spill across the garden. He spoke softly as if she could hear him. "I found her," he said. "She's kind, just like you. You'd be proud." And though the wind outside was quiet, he could almost swear he heard her laughter drifting through the air, soft and familiar. The letter that had once brought him sorrow had now given him something new: closure, connection, and a final piece of the woman he had loved all his life. Her last words, which had once felt heavy with mystery, now carried a different meaning. They weren't words of guilt or confession. They were words of love, unfinished yet complete in their own way. In the end, he realized something beautiful. Love doesn't end with goodbye. It stretches beyond time, beyond secrets, beyond life itself. And though she was gone, her presence lingered, not in pain but in peace. That night before bed, he looked up at the framed photographs on the wall, his wife's gentle smile, their children's laughter, and now, the new face that completed the story. He whispered one last time, We're all together now. Then he turned off the light, closed his eyes, and for the first time since she had left, he slept without the ache of loneliness. Because he knew somewhere deep inside that love, real love, never truly ends.